Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to today's training webcast on top 40 public safety best practices of 2013. We really appreciate your time today. We know your time is valuable, and we hope to make this a very fast-paced, fun, and informative session. We're going to try to kind of pull together 40 of the best practices that we learned, some that were shared by various experts from different technology and service providers, and then also from others that attended the Public Safety Best Practices Forum sessions this year. Just a little about the Public Safety Best Practices Forum for those of you who aren't familiar with it yet. We held 5 events this year in Washington, D.C., Nashville, Tampa, Dallas, and Los Angeles. And essentially what it is the one-day forum where we get together, and we decided to kind of do this because there wasn't really anything like this in the industry, right? We had our AFCO and our NINA events, some of the local, state and national conferences and so forth. But we thought there was definitely an opportunity to kind of get together, similar to what we do if you guys are familiar with the AFCO online forum, where we share ideas. We wanted to put something together where we share ideas in person, and so we put together this forum, and it was a tremendous success this year. And next year, what we're planning on doing is kind of expanding it to 6 more cities. So we'll be visiting Seattle, the San Francisco Bay Area, Denver, Colorado, Minneapolis, New York, New Jersey area, and Atlanta. And it's free to attend, and it's basically just a one-day kind of like lunch and learn where we just share best practices. There's some presentations by the folks that are on this webinar that are helping present, and then we do a lot of kind of town hall Q&A and so forth. And so I'm very pleased to introduce you to several of my colleagues. We've kind of pulled together experts from a variety of areas in different technologies and different service providers. We have Greg Cummings, who's one of my colleagues at BPI. He's our training director, and he's kind of a specialist when it comes to public safety, incident recording, quality assurance, and training. Also joined by Chris Bradford. Chris is a former firefighter paramedic from the Villages Fire Department in Florida, and he now runs the National Q Quality Assurance program with Priority Dispatch. We're also pleased to be joined by Mark Fletcher. He is an EMP from Avaya. He runs their worldwide public safety division. He's their chief architect, and he used to be a dispatcher in Sparta, New Jersey. And Ken from Avtech. We're pleased to have Ken on as a presenter as well. He'll be sharing best practices on IP dispatching and interoperability. Ken is he has 32 years military experience, and he's a retired police sergeant from Salem, New Hampshire, which is actually just down the road from where I'm at. I'm in Londonderry, New Hampshire, just a few miles south of where I live here. So, welcome, and thanks all for helping put this together. I think you guys will find it really valuable. What we did at each of the forums is just to get started in the mornings, what we would do is we have a whiteboard or a flip chart in front of the room, and typically the room was anywhere between 15 to 40 different agencies were represented. And what we would do is come up with the top challenges facing PSAPs today, public safety answering points. So we'd kind of go up, and the challenges, these were kind of the main ones. They range from hiring, right? So kind of starting at the beginning of the process. We want to hire better, faster, smarter. How do we do that? There was a lot of interest in transitioning to Next-Gen 911. This is the year of Next Generation 911, right? The I3 standards are out. Kind of know what we need to do. Now we just need to really understand what it entails and how do we get there. And then doing more with less was a topic that came up quite frequently. Agencies wanted improved efficiency, more automation of time-consuming processes. So you'll see today a lot of ways in which you can automate things that are taking up a lot of time. We can't always hire more people, and retention is obviously an issue. So how do we do more with less? Consolidating resources, we'll talk about that today, and then interoperability to make things a lot easier and more streamlined. Quality assurance and training was a huge topic, and one that is gaining more and more importance in public safety, especially as we transition to next generation 911, and we're handling different forms of media and a lot more systems and so forth. Those protocols and making sure that call takers and dispatchers are following them become more and more important, right? So it helps limit liability exposure, and we'll talk about some options to streamline QA and training and make it more effective. And then employee retention, so that was obviously a big thing. It's not probably one of the most difficult jobs today, and dispatching, call taking, it's one of those things. Not always the recognition's not always there. How do we reward and incentivize and motivate? We'll talk about best practices shared by other PSAPs on that as well. So I'm going to kind of be the voice of the PSAPs, if you will, and then as we go through, I'll be sharing some best practices shared by other PSAPs, and then Chris and Fletch and Greg and Ken will be sharing it from their perspective, what they see their customers doing. So we have I co-authored a book called The High Performing PSAP, Best Practices for NG911 Recording and QA. And what we'd like to do is kind of share this book. So anyone who's willing to share a best practice, there's a chat dialogue box on the right-hand side. So as you go through the presentation and we go through the different areas, the different challenges, if there's any challenges that you've solved or you have something creative or anything you'd love to share, if you chat that in the chat window to the entire audience, then we'll mail you a book, you and your team, a high-performing PSAP book, and so we appreciate that, and we'll also turn it into a blog article and share all those best practices along with these at the end of the webinar. So we appreciate your help in sharing anything that you're doing, whether it comes to retention or creative ideas for motivating people, or what you're doing, technology-wise, or any of the areas. And we'll be sure to send you a book as well. So the first best practice is one that was really fantastic by an agency, Richmond 911 in Virginia, and they're doing some just incredible things all around. But the one that really stood out, and that was just an exceptional best practice, was they figured out a way to not only speed up the hiring process, but to get more qualified candidates. And the way they do this is they do an all-in-one, one-day hiring blitz, right? Because if you think of the normal process, right, from the time you go out and try to find candidates to the time that you actually hire, it could be weeks, if not months. And so what they're doing is kind of shortening all into kind of a one-day, if you will, operational plan. And I'll kind of show you the operational plan here. But there's 6 steps to it. So, people come in. They obviously, have human resources help in kind of recruiting candidates. And then the first step is an employee overview orientation, where they kind of talk a little bit about what the job entails and what the expectations are. And then they use a computerized pre-employment test. They use Critical for screening out. And so kind of after the introduction, the orientation, then they go through these modules, and they test different types of skills, from multitasking to stress management and critical thinking. So if those of you familiar with Critical, have heard a lot of good things at these public safety forums about Critical or similar applications that kind of narrow the funnel down, because it's like the first step in the funnel, if you will. And then they do application supplemental background pre-screening questionnaire. So they'll go and do kind of a background check, make sure that everything looks okay. They're able to do that fairly quickly on site as well. And they do all this at the police academy. So that's kind of another great thing. Think of you coming in to, come on as a potential call taker dispatcher, to have it at the police academy. It's got a very, some clout to that, and it kind of helps with recruiting and the whole experience, right? They also do a suitability assessment, so they use a tool called Select Advantage. And if you guys are familiar with like a Myers-Briggs or any other type of psychological assessment, this really helps just to determine if it's the best fit for their agency, for their positions that they're looking for. So that kind of narrows the funnel down a little bit more. And then they have a panel interview. And all of this is done within, a few hours' time. So it's really nice. They kind of have this process. It's all built out. They're actually getting ready to do one here this month again. And it seems to be working really well for the agency. And they're able to get a lot of qualified candidates. So then the panel interview is kind of the fifth step. And the final step, if you make it through all that and you look like you're a good fit, then they do a conditional employment offer letter. And if you're interested in the sample, I have a sample. But it's really neat in that, you come in, before the day, and you don't really know, and you go through this whole process, and then you have this letter that basically says, as long as your background checks look good and you pass, then we're going to employ you. And so I have a sample. If you'd like to let me know, I'd be happy to send you a sample of that letter that they kindly provided, and it's just a great process. So we'll get on to best practice 2, and this came up a lot, and some of the top highest performing agencies, what they really do, and this helps with all kinds of things, this is why I put it in the beginning, is getting field units, administrators, media involved early, right? So throughout the whole process is kind of getting the patrol units or the administrators, to come in and serve food for the dispatchers, invite them to come eat with dispatchers, take pictures together, kind of inform them of major news, get the media involved, right? So we do this, on and off, but the better you can create a working relationship with the communication center and the field units, we saw a lot of advantages that came out with that throughout, whether it had to do with retention, even hiring, everything just was better for agencies that had really close relationships. Work with the media to praise dispatchers publicly. If there's something that happens, we got to make sure that the field units do praise the dispatchers in the media and that they're not left out. So that's kind of, very important, helps boost morale. And so that's one thing that kind of resonated that we wanted to share with you. And now I'd like to introduce Fletch, who's going to be sharing best practices for transitioning to next generation 911.
Great. Thanks very much, Patrick. I do appreciate it. So as we transition to next gen 911, the key thing is to be able to do this at your own pace. You've got an existing network in place today with MSAG, ALI, ANI, the 911 Tandem, and that legacy network. And the key is to build the ESInet. That's the backbone of next generation 911. And this is what really brings forward the new routing functionalities, the emergency services routing proxies, the emergency call routing function, the location validation. And as new PSAPs come online with this architecture being built, then you start building out and extending into the newer PSAPs that now have connectivity. And these new PSAPs are coming online. So we're very much building in two separate architectures, but this really lets us build at your own pace. And in the next step, it's really just connecting these two architectures together. So you'll see that once the ESInet is built, we put in gateways that connect into the legacy PSAPs and the legacy networks that kind of bring them into the whole fold. So the first part of this is the turn up and test of NextGen 911. Could be in a PSAP that's an existing legacy PSAP or a new one. And then this is what the migration is. It's actually running side by side and then interconnecting. When we look at what the reasons are to move to next generation 911, citizens want to communicate under different modalities. It's more than just a telephone call, SMS, or an email. They're using things like Gmail and Skype and the internet and WebRTC in their computers, and then they're using additional applications like Twitter and Instant Message and Facebook and LinkedIn. These are all things that they're using today in addition to the initial touch points to government are the government applications. So when we look at some of the existing applications that are there, we look at things like 311. And when we look at 311, that's already giving us an interface point into the management and administrative side of government. Hey, there's a street light out. Hey, this is wrong. There's something over here. This allows the tying in of this data into what we call the workforce optimization. So really, when you think about it, with the 311 systems that we're already doing today, we're already bringing in multimedia into public safety. And the next logical step is just moving the 911 network call taker positions into this new architecture where we start tying in a multimodal or PSAP interface, voice, video, instant messaging. We start to talk about some of the collaborative capabilities. And in the commercial world, we call it service or expert assist. In the PSAP world, it's language assist because of a call taker's or a caller's language, or an agency assist. You've got to quote-unquote transfer it, or maybe even a social services assist. So you need to move to this because this is how citizens are communicating today. So when we look at the additional data, today we've got basic anti-alley information. In the future, we're going to have additional data, information out of smart buildings, floor plans, smart information from the devices or from the devices' networks. They'll be able to handle multimedia, so now we can look at the integration of some applications. I've seen applications that actually will read sign language. So your dispatcher might not understand ASL, but an application that's looking at video can decipher that and now start providing some of that expert assist. Maybe it's a temporary stopgap till you get a video translator online, or maybe you're using that as translation. But it's the enablement of the application side inside of public safety that utilizes all of this additional data that's going to be provided by NextGen 911 and putting this on the screen of the dispatcher. When we talk about multimedia conferencing, it's about building this collaborative environment. And whether it's built on an agency level, on a regional level, on a state level, it doesn't really matter. It's just a network of networks. That really what we do is we take this creative cloud. And the NENA 08003 talks about this in section 5.7, which is bridging. It's about taking the additional data in with the caller, the SMS, the MMS messages, bringing all of this data into the i3 cloud and then anchoring this on a conference bridge. Now, it might be a conference bridge in your agency. It might be one that's hosted by the county, might be one that's hosted by the state. That really doesn't matter. That's more of an implementation choice. But the idea is to bring all of this data together so we can start making decisions. And the first decision is which call taker we're going to associate with this request for emergency services. And now they become a resource. We also bring in things like session recording. And this is what gives us our single point of contact where all of this data is now being collected, organized, and recorded. So as we move to the next step, whether we have to transfer to an agency, we don't actually transfer anymore. We just bring in language line or poison control or social services. And the idea is all of the persistent contextual collaborative information that we've gotten in during the call is centralized, it's anchored, it's recorded, and it's available to everybody that comes into this environment. If you were to call somebody right now and say, hey, you got to get on this webinar, you got to see what Fletcher's talking about. This is amazing. They dial in the webinar, they see this screen, right? They don't have to play catch up. All the data is there. So we move on to the next screen here. It's really about this collaborative conferencing model. And don't get hung up on where this conference bridge really is. This is just kind of a virtual thing that can be located anywhere that makes sense depending on your agency's deployment. But here's a couple of use cases. We all know OnStar today calls and verbally says, I got a vehicle that's here with this information. Can you dispatch on it? Great. In the future, OnStar will be able to actually connect into the emergency services IP network. And they'll be sending a SIP-based call into the emergency network with all of this contextual information. The network can start making some decisions. I need this call taker to take care of this because I need dispatch. Oh, and based on all this information, I've got a huge delta V. I'm going to have lower leg trauma based on knowing what crush zones were activated, who was sitting where and were their seatbelts on. The DOT can model the injuries with 80% accuracy. So while I'm delivering this to the call taker and they're doing 911, what's your emergency, and going through their EMD, we're putting the trauma resources on the hospital on alert. Hey, get Dr. Bob, who's the orthopedic surgeon, off the golf course because we're probably going to need him, and somebody might want to fire up Air 2 because we're probably going to need a medevac here. All of that's happening much, much faster than waiting for units to get on scene, collecting that information, and then feeding that back into the network through radio, right? So the next use case is for the hearing impaired. Europe has implemented this actually today with what they call total conversation. But again, a user will have in their profile an indicator. Hi, I'm a deaf user. I want to communicate using American Sign Language. I'm going to need a VRI interpreter. So when they launch a call into the network intelligently says, hey, I've got a deaf caller. I need video remote interpretation. Let's get a call taker that understands ASL sign language. Let's not get the guy who was signing at at the funeral the other day. Or let's get this outside agency that's been contracted to provide this. And now we're in a three-way video conference with the 911 center. This does a couple of things. They can now see the video caller. So if it was a domestic or a fire or something, the dispatcher now has those visual cues that you never had before. And because you're all together in a conference, you've even got audio cues. So you can hear things going on. You can see that there was a domestic in the room. No, 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 everything's okay. You're taking the remote interpreter's word for it today, and they have to interpret what's signed to them. They cannot make commentary. So again, better servicing callers with disabilities. Funding. This is, again, another best practice. Avaya, and there's several others out there that offer no-fee assistance for non-profit groups. You've got to go out there. You have to research and identify grants that can be aligned to the projects that you're doing. You have to look at what can pay for consulting, what can pay for definition of the project. There's a lot of grant money that's out there right now. I was just on a call with Europe this morning because I'm very active with ENA, the European Emergency Number Association. They just signed yesterday a proclamation for NextGen 112 over there that's making like $8 million available in grant money to agencies to do pilot programs and to do research on this. So the grant money is absolutely out there, but you cannot sit and fill out this paperwork yourself. You need to get a grant writer to state your case because you are battling against every other agency for money, and it's the one that writes the best case that's going to get it. So you need to do this, and there are people in the industry that will help out with some no-fee assistance.
Thanks,
So
Flex.
we'll
Really
kick it
appreciate
back
it.
over to you. Yeah, no problem. Thanks very
Absolutely.
much.
So kind of back onto to funding, and kind of another thought here that we wanted to share that came up quite frequently is the notion of virtualization, right? So it's not direct funding per se, like for certain projects or so forth, but it is saving agencies a lot of money over time. And what it is leveraging resources. So taking separate locations. Right now, you know, we're all familiar with like the physical consolidation where we consolidate into a single facility or a single building. But taking separate locations and not necessarily, you know, adjusting which employees are working where. They're still working in their same facilities, but you use the IP network or the IP backbone to actually share technical resources and expertise without that full consolidation. And what it's doing is providing not only for better emergency services, but also saving costs in the long run. And just some best practices that came out in the discussions. It's really important to educate the decision makers, the administrators, as well as the call takers on the process. You know, call takers may be taking different types of calls, more varied types of calls across different jurisdictions to help out. One that came up that I thought was kind of funny is hire great network engineers, right? Because they really need to understand IP telephony and IP networking, and also technology savvy communicators. So you know, some of the best practices shared were around trying to personalize interfaces. A lot of the interfaces and applications are going more towards kind of visual interfaces, if you will, big buttons, you know, not small lines of text anymore, just kind of very visual, and so that it's very more intuitive, quicker, and you can work with your technology partners to do this and try to make the workflow more streamlined on the applications. This came up quite a bit as well, as preparing for visual trauma, right? So Fletch mentioned that, you know, multimedia and the ability to possibly even see, you know, the emergency incident or the situation that's happening. You know, that can cause trauma depending on the type of emergency. So, you know, if you're familiar with like the types of emotional preparedness training that like the Navy SEALs, for example, will go through. I'm not saying it has to be to that level, but we definitely want to start thinking about bringing more of that type of training into the communication center, periodically screening call takers and dispatchers wherever, you know, when it's justified, and then really nurturing peer support. And you're going to see that as a best practice that's kind of shared throughout today is having peers kind of help each other, and it's not just, you know, a supervisor down kind of management style. We're going more towards, you know, peers helping each other, and we're going to need that in this, especially when visual multimedia is kind of coming into the communication center. At this point, kind of like to expand on, you know, that IP backbone that I kind of referenced in a virtual center, and Ken from AppTech is going to be talking about IP dispatching and interoperability best practices.
Okay, good afternoon. So with a lot of PSAPs that are transitioning from analog radios to the IP infrastructure, a lot of them are asking why IP. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. I mean, with the P25 protocols that are coming out and everything becoming digital, there's a lot of good advantages to moving from analog to the IP infrastructure. A lot of you have or may have large back rooms worth of equipment, as stacks of cards and hardware that have a tendency to fail over time, a lot of electricity running through there. So that's one of the big benefits of transferring from the analog to IP is no more stacks of hardware. You can actually free that up. Everything is pretty much software-based. So what it also allows is it allows you to upgrade without having to change out hardware every time. Really, you're talking software. It's the same as when you upgrade a for the most part, Microsoft Office or anything along those lines, you're upgrading the operating system of your dispatch, and you don't have to go and change out all that hardware in the back room. So you can get new features, new benefits, the ability to change things around, improve, without having to then shut everything down, bring everything back up with the entire infrastructure. You can do one at a time, one console at a time. The nice thing about it, it's like the internet. It's a distributed system. So basically, it allows it to be fault tolerant and no single point of failure. Kind of like the internet. It's not you're not going to bring it down. You're going to be able to utilize the dispatching centers around the entire internet area, anything that has IP connection. The other thing is that it allows you to transition any endpoint device to any dispatcher. You have multiple dispatchers, and it allows you to connect with the various radio systems and telephone, as well as your regular standard telephony and your SIP. It allows you to end up connecting your fire departments, your EMS, your state, local, county. Basically, they can all talk. They don't have to switch channels, switch radio systems. You can actually have the dispatcher patch you through to be able to take care of that. There's also cost savings, migrating away from leased lines. If you're dealing with telephony lines and all that, and you have to lease those lines, and it'll be able to talk. It extends the radio system out through the IP base rather than having to completely rely on the radio frequency infrastructure. The nice thing about IP is that you can, as a dispatcher, you can join and leave conversations needed. You can patch two systems together and then continue to do your job on other things. You can talk on the phone. If your detectives need to talk to a patrolman, or traffic needs to talk to another patrolman, that kind of deal, you can patch them. You can, as a dispatcher, you can come in, you can deal with the conversation, you can back out of it. You can have the ability to have a backup center, a disaster center. What happens if, and we'll cover this a little bit later, what happens if you have issues where your dispatching center goes away? You can access all your endpoints instantly when needed. So if you're going to go IP and you're looking at dispatching consoles, there are some questions you need to in order to bridge the gap when investigating a new console and bridging the gap between assumption and facts. Yeah, Patrick. All right. So one of the things you need to look at is, or do I want to go to an open dispatch console? Now, Proprietary does have its advantages. A single source to deal with. If you're dealing with one of those larger radio infrastructure corporations that provide you with the radios, the infrastructure, the consoles, all that, it's a single service. You deal with them, you call them, and that's the nice thing is you're dealing with one person. The other thing is it's minimal configuration to integrate the components. It's all one manufacturer, they put it all together for you. However, there are some disadvantages of that as well. The problem is there is less flexibility. You are locked in to that particular system. Usually you're locked into some contracts. And again, that single source to deal with, well, it's great if they give you the service that you need. However, if they don't, then that's the problem. You're going to have to deal with that single source. If you need any customization, there's also issues that it's going to cost you to provide that. It can come right out of your any particular budget, CapEx, or your operating budget. And what happens if the single source that you're dealing with, they go away? Their system no longer is supported. They're bought out. Then what? Then you're going to have to change not only your radio system, but also your dispatching consoles and everything else. So the open, as we kind of alluded to some of the advantages there's numerous support qualities. You can connect up to, for the most part, any radio system through the dispatching console. You can use your existing equipment. A lot of times you can transition from your legacy to the new P25 digital that's coming out. without having to change over an open source console or an open console. Allows you to use the best of breed. You can go out and you can shop around and find out, okay, what is the best radio system that I can go with? What's the best console I can go with? What's the best infrastructure? As well as, what are my price points? What happens if I can't go out best of breed, but I want to have a budget that allows me to get a decent radio system that connects to a console, so it can allow you to lower those hardware purchases. When your hardware goes end of life, it can be easily replaced. You're not stuck into a contract with a large proprietary manufacturer. And it also increases the quality, because you can now compete and with have the vendors compete against each other to provide you products, training, services, all that. So there are some disadvantages to the Open Dispatch Console, and that is that there is some configuration that usually has to take place between the various components. And when you do need service, you have to know which component you're dealing with and the multiple points of contact. A lot of times, though, those disadvantages can be easily overcome by the quality. So when you start to look at your consoles, you have to take a look at, do I really want to have my dispatchers go through a whole nother set of training? So with the standardization, you want to have the ability to limit some of the training and get up to speed faster. When you start looking at consoles, you want to make sure that there's the ability to ease of use, configurability. So some tools that you want to have is a configurable graphic user interface. So do you want that console to look like your previous console but with better advantages? You can do that if you have configurable. Fletch talked about personalized interface and all that. You can do that with certain consoles that have that configurable GUI as well. Console-to-console intercoms. You want to have the ability to talk between dispatchers. They may not be co-located in the same room or in the same facility. Facility intercoms, timers, IP cameras, all this you have the ability to get through IP. When you're looking at consoles, you really want to make sure that these are some of the features that you're able to incorporate within the console system to give your dispatchers all the tools that they value as they're doing their job. So when you're dealing with IP consoles and you have to make a decision, do I want to go wireless or wireline? Now, wireless, basically, it's a USB connection to a control station. There are some advantages that it does connect up to the legacy and proprietary equipment. If there's no wireline access into your disaster area, wireless works great. It's simple to set up for a limited scope. However, you usually only have access to a few talk groups. You don't get all the functionality of the radio interfaces when you go wireless, and consoles may not have priority during transmission. So then there's the other option is wireline, and that's your direct Ethernet connection. The advantage, you do get the larger feature set. Consoles will have priority. There's no risk of radio frequency coverage loss. Backroom equipment is very significantly reduced and simple to configure and to scale when you need more consoles. But there are disadvantages there too, in that if you may not get your access into the disaster recovery location without that, and it may not connect to all systems. So you have to weigh the pros and cons of whether or not you want to go wireless or wireline. So when you're looking at this, and the other question you need to ask is, what are my disaster management plans? So when you're looking at consoles, you have to ask yourself these questions. What happens if I lose my radio infrastructure? What happens if I cannot gain access to the facility, either a white powder event or something that's taken place? Or worse, what happens if the facility becomes non-functional? With IP and within particular consoles, it does give you that advantage of being able to set up remote consoles in a different location so that if any of these events take place, they can have access to all the endpoints and radios, and you can continue your operations without minimal interruption. So again, this same slide kind of shows the same thing, is that if your regular dispatch goes out and then even your backup goes out, with IP and everything else, the way it's connected up, you can have a remote dispatch facility, sometimes running right off of a laptop. Avtech consoles actually have that ability. And you can set up a laptop or even a tablet so that you can continue to have your operations going.
All right, thanks, Ken. I really appreciate it. And I know there's a lot of information. A lot of these slides, we're kind of going through them quickly. The slides will be made available, so apologize if you guys are taking notes seriously, but the slides will be made available, and we'll also send you a link to the recorded webinar as well that you can share with your team. So now we're going to transition into quality assurance and training and some best practices around those areas. Just before we do that, I kind of want to review of typically what the quality assurance process looks like today, and many of you may be able to sympathize with this, but day one, the day of the call, or the day we start the evaluation, we search through the CAD records. Then there's a sudden emergency that happens. We get distracted. But we get back and we begin searching in the logging recorder for the particular call or calls that we want related to that incident that we'd like to evaluate. We might get distracted again, and this is just based on a lot of conversations we had. This is the typical workflow that we seem to see a lot. And then we return to search in the recorder. We'll burn recordings to a CD and send them to QA. Those are the ones we want to evaluate. The QA evaluator, whether it be the supervisor or perhaps you have a team or someone that evaluates QA in your agency, scores the call, typically in a spreadsheet, right, or a paper form. And the supervisors then receive the printout that gives them notes and things that they should be coaching on. And then the call taker receives instruction. And all this happens in a period that's typically, it could take anywhere between 3 to 6 weeks. So it's a long process. It's a very manual process, and one that Greg Cummings from VPI is going to share some tips on how to automate that process and not only speed up the time it takes to evaluate calls for supervisors, but also improve the effectiveness of your QA program. So take it away, Greg.
Okay. Thank you very much, Patrick. And Ken and Fletch, great job so far, you guys. Really good. And I want to first start off, did that message Patrick just went through, that resonate with our audience? Because I think everyone out there is probably, maybe a lot of us are holding up our hands saying, yeah, that is my process, and that's something that impacts me. And that's what we're going to go through these next few slides and kind of talk about is what do we need to be successful in our environments today and in the future that's going to help us get more value and really start to kind of streamline our processes and improve efficiencies overall by utilizing, call recording platforms, quality assurance, coaching, feedback, kind of those best practices. And that's a lot of it that we're going to talk about is what we garnered from the discussions we've had during this year, right? And again, why we're bringing everyone together for these best practices of 2013. So this slide that we've got up right now, ensure that your recording supports NG911 requirements. This is critical. As we move into that realm and are getting more and more into the NG911 and the requirements that are out there, take into account some of these things that are going to help you to improve process down the road, Is the platform that you're implementing or the platform that you have now for your quality assurance, your call recording, your coaching and feedback, do they fit these categories so you can support or be supported in the efforts of NG911? Is it an open standard, non-proprietary hardware and software, Can you record and track transfer calls? How secure is the voice and data communications? Can you accept all forms of media into the same system? With NG911, we're going to start to collect and see multiple forms of media being disseminated down, and we need to be able to collect and gather all that information. And can you have the same impact on that data that you can with your standard logging components that are in place? Are you able to collect data from your disparate sources, your CAD system? Is that data being collected and gathered? And that's where we get into this next view is, integration with CAD is going to become more and more prevalent in our public safety environments. and it provides a lot of value to the end process, which is to evaluate and search for those recordings, right, to do with what you need. So as an example, we want our CAD system to be able to tag data to the recording, right, whatever that media is, either a call recording, a text, a video that might have come in, whatever we're collecting, right, as part of our logging software. We want the CAD system to be able to provide us some data so it can in turn make your dispatchers, the incident recreation folks more effective in their ability to access that information. We want to be able to collect incident ID, incident type, right, location, severity, incident status, any notes that might be related to that CAD incident. And if you append that data, like we're showing here in the graph, into the media that was recorded by your logging software, then you have another tool set to actually become more effective in locating incidents that need attention. You want to perform quality analysis on your, like what we like to say, your high-value incidents. I want the ones that are going to have a greater impact for my coaching and training down to my staff. If you're doing the hunt and peck method and just finding a recording to listen to, that recording might not contain a lot of value in it, whereas if you understood that there was an incident that had a high priority, right, you can effectively search for that based on the information from your CAD system, like incident ID or incident type, and then locate that recording, and now you start to do your quality analysis against it. So that's really a key, and it's a transition we're starting to see more and more of with a lot of our public agencies, is the fact that they're kind of taking that step towards, I've got a logging system, but for the longest time I've just kind of done a search and a find and a listen. But now I want to make it a little bit more effective. I want to search by date, time, and incident ID, incident type, the severity, maybe the incident status, to really start to get those high-value recordings. Those are the ones that we want to target. Right, if you've got requirements to do a certain amount of medical calls, evaluate a certain amount of medical calls on a monthly basis, is it hard to find those medical calls, right? But if you had that incident data from CAD, right, associated with those recordings, it would make it a lot easier to locate those specific recordings that you need to review. So this is critical. Make sure that your logging software is meeting those requirements and can provide you that kind of interface into CAD to collect that data. Now, along with that is the ability to automate the supervisor QA workflow, which again is critical. We all understand that in our public safety environments, time is important. And going back to that original, right, workflow that Patrick talked through, you go to your logger, you look for a call, you get distracted. You go back, you get distracted, right? What about building in some automation? Your logging software, if it's bundled with the ability to provide QA, right, that quality analysis, the system should be able to, right, as you're thinking about implementing new systems, the system should be able to automatically schedule certain calls to be evaluated and assign those to your supervisors, anyone who's responsible for doing that quality analysis. That way, when the supervisor sits down to do their quality review, they provided a list. In the upper left-hand corner, you can see that to-do list. And all I need to do is select that item, and now I can start to evaluate it. And you get a good foundational, right, quality evaluation form. You need to have the recording present. You need to have the screen capture. That's a really big thing. You want to watch workflow on that console workstation to see how they're progressing through their different screens, so you can again provide back process improvements for efficiency, because time is of the essence. So automatically schedule quality evaluations, building in valuable evaluation forms and the capturing of that data. And then once you complete that process, feedback is critical in a timely manner. And this is one of those really important things. All too often, and I've worked in contact centers, I've been to a ton of dispatch centers, and I've talked to a lot of people in our industry, and I don't have a problem doing the analysis, the QA. It takes me some time to get the feedback to the dispatcher or the call taker, because they work different shifts, they're not always here. A week goes by sometimes, 2 weeks, before I'm able to give them their feedback. We want that to be automatically delivered with the call recording directly to the call taker or the dispatcher. They can look at the feedback. They can take any kind of coaching activities. Maybe you've got an internal LMS system, or you've got a place that you want to direct them to go review a policy or a procedure. Right? You can automatically assign training based on their QA scores. The more effectively you can deliver the feedback to the individual who's evaluated, the better they're going to be at driving some change. You have to make sure it's fresh, right? That's the important message. It's got to be fresh in my mind that an evaluation was recently done on a call that I did, and I'm getting direct feedback within a matter of days, not a matter of weeks. So your logging software, your QA software needs to have that integration, data collection from CAD, automation of QA scheduling of those evaluations, and then an automatic feedback process down to the call taker or the dispatcher to really shorten up that time frame from time I performed QA review to the time I delivered the feedback to really start to drive that change. And that's one of those things, again, we're going to see continue to take off, right, and move forward as the years progress. All right, so again, right, this is a fun one, building up some quality assurance best practices. If I asked you a question, everyone, but I can't obviously field the answers right now, are you allowing your call takers, right, to flag calls for evaluation? Are they able to go into the system and actually, I took this call, I was part of this incident, right, that was my recording, I want to flag that and I want somebody to evaluate it. Or, right, I'd like some coaching, right, without actually scoring it. Right? Compete in the PSAP Winter Olympics. This is a fun one, right? In being able to say that was my best call of the year, or that was my best call of the quarter, and then they can flag those interactions, automatically notifies someone in the organization to go review that, and then you can pick out of a pool of 15 or 20, right, and say, here's our champion, right? This is our best call of the quarter, right? And give them a little fake Grammy like we've got listed there. So creating that best practices call library for training purposes is always one of the things I recommend. If you were to access your logging system, your call recorder, and identify 20 or 30 really, really good calls that were procedurally correct, sounded right, and then you can easily sit down a new dispatcher during their incubation stage, right, when they're kind of getting ready to get on the floor on their own, and have them listen to calls over and over again to understand what it might be like once they are actually in that role. So you can incorporate that into your training. You can have a best practices call library that's available and can be utilized. Another key thing that we are looking towards in the future is leveraging speech and text analytics, which is going to be big, right? And again, this all goes back to automation. Audio and text communication comes into the logger. The system should be able to index and create a transcription, and then utilize business rules for the automation, right, to improve your organization's efficiency. If I'm able to look at that communication and use a business rules engine inside your recording software to automatically schedule things for quality evaluation, automatically alert someone when we notice a trend or a pattern, right? When we have a commonality, and we're going to look at a case study in a second that's going to kind of talk to that. The notion in starting to think about how can speech and text analytics really start to work for you in the next few years. If you're starting to do some of that future planning, think about the drivers behind it. It's the ability to take that data, convert it into transcripts, index the information, and use a system to generate process efficiencies and also point out and alert you where things might be on an uptake, on a downswing, right? Getting that trend analysis, getting that automation built into the system by utilizing business rules and the different speech and text analysis software that's available. Here's a good case study. This is one that me and Patrick have talked about quite a few times. Right, and as an example, right, a Pennsylvania county experienced a string of calls regarding porch fires, right, and this was a real thing that, they were trying to, they had a number of calls regarding porch fires. So what they had done was they utilized their speech engine, and they started to create a custom category within their speech program where they said, we want to locate all recordings that happened in a certain period of time where the word porch and fire occurred. And they found a number of other addresses that had similar crime scenarios, right? And the evidence that they captured from each of those cases that they did some additional investigation, right, led to certain suspects, right? And they were able to kind of resolve that. So this speaks to that trending is if we are seeing some type of a pattern, how can we go about leveraging that information to be more effective in identifying it and then taking the proper course of action? And by utilizing your speech program to get through the application, understand the information, and categorize it can allow you to spot those areas where you need to put some additional attention and focus. Use of the speech analytics and text analytics to enhance quality assurance, right? Script compliance. Are my call takers and dispatchers asking the right questions? Are they adhering to our standards, policies, and procedures? Right? Are they following the new ones that we just implemented? Again, I'm going to use my speech engine to create categories to look at a new policy that we put in place, and I'm going to review and analyze 3 weeks of data to make sure that we're saying those right things, and then I can be assured that the policy is being followed. So it's really important to understand where can you start to leverage speech and text analytics, right? Everything from business process automation to doing QA scheduling to categorizing and trending your calls and knowing what's happening in your environment, to even things like script compliance and adherence to policies and procedures. Again, a very important thing, especially in our public safety environments.
Great. Thank you so much, Greg. Really appreciate it. I know we're approaching the top of the hour, and for those of you that can stay with us, that's fantastic, and we have a lot of great best practices to share. If you're unable to, we will be sending you the recorded version as well as the slides. So I'd like to introduce Chris at this point from Priority Dispatch, and he's going to be sharing some more best practices around QA and training.
Thanks, appreciate it. I guess they saved the best for last. Just joking. Everyone's been really great. I'm just trying to add to that. I know our time is down, so I'm going to go through as quick as I can, but try to explain why we feel like this is one of the best practices to have is QA, because without a doubt, agencies, the public, if you don't have it in place, that becomes your QA. The Dr. Phil's and the Oprah Winfrey's, they expect a certain amount of professionalism, expertise from which they watch on TV. So agencies now have to put this in place, or else they're going to be looking at different lawsuits or other people doing it for them. So that's why we're trying to really push doing QA. So just to talk about it, no matter what you're doing, police, medical, fire, and even there's nursing now, you have to have some type of way to do quality assurance. You got to have some type of standard in place. We have protocols, and there's many different type of protocols, but that's probably where you would start as a baseline. And once you have something that people are expected to do, then we got to go back and measure their performance to it. So each of these different disciplines, there is a quality assurance component place with it. One of the things that we found out early in 2000 is that many people adopted the system of using protocols or giving people instructions, but then there was only like 2 or 3% of all those centers that were doing quality assurance. So it was out there, but everybody was doing their own thing. And with that in place, you had many people not doing things correctly. So you got to have something in place as a mechanism to make sure that it's working correctly, and that's where QA comes in. And since we're talking about best practices, some of the things that are out there right now with our software that does QA on the protocols called Aqua, we've did a partnership with VPI, and one of the great things about this partnership is that you're able to use our software, click on a button, and it will automatically pull the audio in. That'll take out so much time instead of you having to go through, search for an audio, the fact that it's right there. And then there's other components to where if you just want to listen to one segment, perhaps just the CPR instructions, you don't have to sit there and fumble and try to play with the times. You can just hit specifically that link and it will only play that segment. So those are things that would cut down on doing quality assurance when you know that you don't have to go in there and search and find audios. The great thing that it will coincide with the quality assurance software that we use at Priority Dispatch called Aqua. So again, part of the best practice is to know what's out there, to know what can help you be more effective, use your time more wisely. The other things that we want to talk about is QA in general. Many people look at it just one-sided. We want to review calls, and that's it. But really, as you look at the slide, it goes back to the whole CQI, Plan, Do, Check, Act. And every aspect that you do things, whether it's hiring, whether it's training, whether it's trying to maintain your quality assurance program, you got to be able to look at it, evaluate it, and then make changes if it's not working. So we really advocate that you start right from the beginning, even with your hiring process, all the way down to the end, and making sure that everybody is still in place, because no one is perfect. There's always going to be a need for improvement, no matter what we do, no matter how we're doing it. We wanted to bring to the mindset is the hidden costs, because many people fail to realize this. They think that you can take a quality assurance course and come back and boom, there it is, you can do it. But really, that's not the case. There are lots of hidden costs which sometimes will set people up for failure. And what happens is that they start to rob Peter to pay Paul. Well, we'll get the supervisor and we'll add these duties to their responsibilities, and now we're taking away really from being effective in a quality assurance. So on the slide, it really has just bullet all the different aspects of costs that you have to allocate for. Really, doing QA is a full-time job based on the amount of calls that you're queuing and the amount of disciplines that you have. It could be 2 full-time employees and plus the benefits, so you could be paying quite a lot. And if you haven't sat down and prepared in advance, then when you go to implement it, it will fail, because no one's going to be there to do the job correctly. So that really goes back to doing a plan, do, check, act, the total system approach. Before you get there, you got to allocate what is really going to be needed to not only get a QA program, but to make sure it succeeds. So these bullet points were put out for you to start looking at and start thinking about how does it affect your agency, how is it affecting what you're doing currently right now. So one of the things that we've found to help in these areas is separating QA and QI, and though they work together, it can be separated, because quality assurance really is checking did they do it, did they not do it. The quality improvement is trying to help them to get better on areas of where they failed, or actually just letting them know how well they're doing in performance. And what we found by separating the two, usually your senior employees, your supervisors, they're the ones that have this responsibility because they have the knowledge, they have the wisdom. But to take them and put them behind a room and have them listen to calls, well, you just lost all that wisdom and knowledge to look over your floor or to manage the system, because they're listening to tapes and they're scoring cases. Well, the scoring process could be done separately. Someone could do that. And really that important role of sitting down with the employee, give them that feedback, and helping them to improve. The coaching part could be used by those senior employees that have the ability to help them apply what they need to do, instead of taking that time away in a room reviewing cases. So what we found is that when you outsource certain aspects of your QA, it buys back time for you to be one-on-one with your employees. Now, there's many different aspects of outsourcing. Some people have used, people from the fire department or paramedics on the road to come into dispatch. Even though they're not perhaps dispatchers, they understand the QA process because that's what they do out in the field. And so, did the dispatcher do it or not is really 90% of the aspect of a call. The other intricacies that are there can be done or set aside for the one-on-one approach. But checking the quality assurance side can be done by outsourcing to outside vendors or other employees that perhaps have retired and come back. By outsourcing, you see again all the different benefits because they're not tied into your system anymore. They don't have the politics that are within the room of dispatch, and it gives you a fast return and all the other bullets that are on there. The national queue, we offer that. We will give you an outside source to come in and do just the QA side of it, allowing you the time to do the one-on-one with your employees. We don't know your people. We get your policies and procedures, and we're really an employee, but we're just remote. And our Qs are instructors that go out and teach the class, so they come not only knowing the process, but with years of experience and wisdom. So those difficult cases, that 5 to 10% that are really hard to figure out, they're able to manage and give effective feedback to help your employees. We find out that it's cheaper because it doesn't tax your system. You don't have all the benefits that you have to pay an employee, and they're always there 24/7. So that's just one way. There's other avenues out there that agencies have used to do quality assurance. As I said, using people from fire departments or agencies, as the police department, those that are out in the field to come in to just do that one aspect because they live it, they do it, and that has helped in trying to not only get QA in place, but more importantly, maintain it and have it to be effective. So hopefully by just giving you a quick overview of QA and best practices that are out there, it'll help you to, if you are implementing it or if you are reevaluating your system, to look at all the different aspects that exist so that when you make the decision, you do it to do it for the long haul, not for the short.
Wonderful. Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate it. And now the remaining 8 best practices are ones that were shared by agencies at the various events and kind of help us go full circle. So, we went through, the transitioning to next-gen 911, leveraging IP, quality assurance training, and then now gathering feedback from citizens, and then we'll get into employee motivation, retention, and best practices around that. So it's very important, and I don't know, it was about 30%, 25 to 30% of PSAPs were actually gathering citizen feedback. So after 911 calls, whether it be emergency or, different types of emergencies, they would send out typically in the mail. Some were thinking of doing post-call type of surveys where the calls are made a week later or 2 weeks later. But typically it's done through the mail. And these are just some of the questions that are being asked. How timely was your call answered? And usually you want to keep it short, right, on a scale of 1 to 5. In fact, we have a brief survey after this webinar with 3 questions we'd love to answer you to take a couple minutes to provide us feedback. It really helps us get better as well. But this allows your agency to get better, and it's great feedback when the actual call taker can see what the citizen they were serving said about their service. So the open-ended comments are fantastic. And then the real best practice here is not only doing the surveys on a consistent basis, but following up with a personal call on any of the open issues. So we found agencies that were doing that, the feedback was really was well received by the community, and then it helps you improve your operations as well. Ongoing coaching is key. So Greg talked a little bit about integrating coaching into your QA form, so automating the delivery of your training programs to your call takers and dispatchers. But this is just a study that was done in the 20s, and some of you may be familiar with it. It was a manufacturing plant outside of Chicago, and basically what they were testing is just they would change the lightness or the brightness of the room and turn the lighting up in the manufacturing plant, turn it down. And what they were looking for is how did that affect performance, if at all? And what they noticed is every time they make a change in the lighting, the performance went up for a little while. So it went up, and then they kind of turn it down, performance went up. And they tried doing different things like cleaning certain areas and changing things. And every time they made a change, performance went up for a little period of time. And essentially, the message here is that really that's why QA and coaching becomes so important. It has to be ongoing, is that they know that you care and that you're paying attention to your call takers and dispatchers. You're going to see that performance improvement. With some agencies that would post the stats just on a whiteboard every day, on the key stats, average speed of answer, time to distance, all these types of stats on the wallboard, the QA scores, and just show people where everyone ranked, and it really helped boost performance. They knew where they were at all times. Some agencies don't show that information to everyone. Some are deciding to do that, and we're starting to see more and more transparency. But just knowing where people stand and knowing that you care is important, and kind of that ongoing coaching. Train smarter. So there are several trainers that attended our forums, and here's kind of a quote, if there's one thing harder than being a 911 operator or dispatcher, it's training someone to be one. And I think that rings true for many of us. We heard things like ditch the slave driver attitude, feed it in small bites. There's a lot of information when we're training dispatchers, and just kind of stop the eye rolling, right, and don't give up as easy, right. Encourage questions and answer honestly. Engage mentors to help out. Again, that's kind of a big trend we're seeing is peer mentoring. Again, like flattening the agency, flattening the organization to where peers play a big role and dispatchers play a big role in all kinds of areas. And then let go. Unless they're really messing up or someone's life is in danger, you got to let people learn on their own. And it's not always the easiest to do, but and that's how people learn typically the best is by kind of figuring things out on their own. Using training to motivate and reward, right? So there's a lot of free training that's out there by a variety of different agencies. This webinar, for example, is something that you could send to them or offer to managers and dispatchers. The state training conferences, perhaps the 40-hour academy training, and then even train the trainer courses. Allow your top performers, as an incentive to attend these trainer courses and become an in-house specialist on whatever topic it is. Some other creative ideas we heard, and we're a lot of great best practices around using peer recognition. So one agency, when we were in D.C., they used pins they allow essentially peers, whenever there's something that's done really well or is a really good call, peers are the ones that actually can give other dispatchers and call takers pins. And so it's kind of like a challenge, kind of like a game. You might hear the words gamification. It's becoming bigger now, where you actually allow peers to recognize each other. And you could have your supervisors involved as well, but the big thing is kind of allowing peers to recognize. And whoever had the most pins, there's rewards associated with that or incentives. Another one, fire agency, they had kind of blank Dalmatians, white dogs, and what they did is all the dispatchers and call takers had a number of black spots that they could give out when anything was done well, when someone helped them out, and whoever had the most black dots on their dog at the end was given a reward. And some of the rewards for kind of top performers are the ones that were helping out the most. Attending job fairs to help interview candidates, so allowing them to kind of go, and what this does is not only gets them out of the center, but it also can provide even better interviews and potentially better candidates because they're able to relate. Vote on new communication equipment to be purchased. Designate parking spots by the front door, and mentor building programs so they could be mentors for new hires and trophies and certificates. So just some creative ways to allow peers to actually recognize each other. So recognition, right? Turnover rate is currently at about 19% annually, so very high. Again, it's not an easy job, but some of the things we heard that it's recognition, not salary, is what people crave the most. And managers are a key part in this. So we talked about peer-to-peer, but we heard things like employees leave their bosses, not their jobs. And I think that's true in a lot of cases if you think about it. Public recognition we talked about earlier is key. Train and retrain, right? So just skills are huge. They're more likely to be able to earn recognition if they have those skills. And then this transparency, whether it's posting metrics, on a whiteboard or using software to post metrics to where they know where they stand at all times, or just keeping them on the loop on new policies, procedures, hiring, and that, make them feel part of the team. And then rotate employees through tasks to keep things fresh. That was something that we heard. Culture is a big thing. So how do we overcome some of the signs of what we heard is a toxic workplace, right? And this is, not super common, but it does happen in certain agencies where you hear things like, hey, it's not my job, where people are setting, kind of saying, hey, I don't really need to do this. I'm not going to go the extra mile. So you got to make it safe for people and reward people for going that extra mile. No one listens anyways, right? Typically that's due to poor communication skills. So offer training programs for enhancing internal communications among each other. We're treated like kids, right? That mainly has to do with not being transparent and not understanding the direction of the agency and where the agency is going. So make decisions, with open books, communicate, encourage questions, and, another one, people get away with murder here, right? So the key is just kind of always reinforcing that the goal and the mission of the job is to serve, and then enforce accountability and focus on the interests of the team, not just individuals. And the last best practice is one that kind of relates to some of the culture issues, but this also came up is eating your young, right? So you have new dispatchers that come on board, and they're taunted and not necessarily given the respect that they deserve. So how do you do that, right? You hire for attitude and then train for ability. So that was one of the hiring specialists gave this recommendation. It's just focus on attitude, right? Obviously, some of the assessment tests, like we talked about critical and the select advantage test for psychology, that'll kind of weed out a lot. But if you look for attitude, that's going to be a key in getting that right culture fit. The mentorship program is huge, right? So you're less likely to eat your young or nitpick and pick on new employees if you're their mentor, right? So I think creating a mentorship program is huge. And then foster kind of the personal networking. And I know we try to do this quite a bit with, we bring in food and potlucks and things, bowling, wiffle ball tournaments, spa days, things where we can foster kind of a team environment. So so thank you so much for your time today. We apologize for going over, but we hope that you learned some best practices. And this was just kind of the tip of the iceberg, but we hope you can join us next year at one of the 6 regional public safety forum events at peaceatforum.com. The attendance is free. It does include a nice lunch, and coffee and tea. And we'd love to have you and love to meet you. So thanks for all the panelists today, and thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it and hope you have a wonderful afternoon.